the desert sands, out where the cactus stands. Night falls, another weary day is through.
Welcome back to the Oscar Project Podcast, the show where I discuss Oscar-nominated films year by year. I am your host, Jonathan Eifferberg, and today I'll be discussing the 1928 film In Old Arizona with my friend Joanne Thornborough, who writes the Pop Goes My Brain newsletter. She returns to the podcast after joining me as part of my countdown to the 97th Academy Awards back in February. Joanne, welcome back to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So before we get into today's film, tell listeners again who you are and where they can find your work.
My name is Joanne Thornborough. I'm a pop culture writer. I film, TV, music, whatever strikes my fancy. Books, absolutely. You can find Pop Goes My Brain as Substack, and I update it twice a month.
Fantastic. Well, before we get into In Old Arizona, I do want to update our place in history. Our last film that we talked about last week was just December 15th, whereas this one is December 25th of 1928, not 2028. We're not there yet. So we only have about a week and a half in between these two films releasing. So I didn't find out too much of what was going on in the world. Obviously, everyone was gearing up for Christmas time, that time of the year. The one notable birth I saw was the writer and philosopher Philip K. Dick, very famous science fiction writer, was born on December 16th. There was some sort of ceremony in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, honoring Orville Wright on December 17th for the 25th anniversary of the first powered flight that they did in that area. And on December 21st, then President Calvin Coolidge signed a bill confirming or acknowledging that they would be building the Boulder Dam, which is now known as the Hoover Dam on the Colorado River. So not too much going on, at least that I was able to find, unless you were able to come up with other history of the time.
I did find out that on December 20th at 243 West 47th Street in New York, that the Ethel Barrymore Theater opened.
Okay. Relevant for our conversation here, obviously.
Yes.
Fantastic. And I wonder, I'm going to assume it's probably not in business anymore. I know a lot of those old theaters, or maybe it is, who knows?
I know it might have been renamed. I'm trying to remember now.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll keep going. We can circle back to that if you find anything on whether it's still around. So we'll jump right into going over the film. In Old Arizona first appeared in theaters on Christmas Day, December 25th, 1928. It was directed by Irving Cummings and Raoul Walsh from a screenplay by Tom Barry, and it was based on the short story The Caballero's Way by O. Henry.
It stars Warner Baxter as the Cisco Kid, Edmund Lowe as Sergeant Mickey Dunn, and Dorothy Burgess as Tonya Maria. The film has a running time of 95 minutes and was produced by Winfield Sheehan and distributed by Fox Film Corporation.
And Warner Baxter won the award for Best Actor at the Second Academy Awards for this film. And the film was also nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Writing, and Best Cinematography. The film is easily available on DVD as well as on YouTube as of this recording. So we'll get right into the kind of the plot of the film, and we start off with some scenes. Well, I guess first we should mention that this was one of the early talking films, and I think this is really the first one that I've covered on the podcast this season where we have full talking film. So we're at a crossroads here. And we see that right away in this kind of western town. There's a horse-drawn coach that comes up and starts loading some passengers, and then they head off out into the desert to go who knows where, whatever the next town is. And we see everything going on, but we hear a lot of the conversations of the people. We hear the horses galloping. We hear as the coach drives off, we hear a mariachi band that's nearby. So a lot of not so subtle sound things right at the beginning of this movie to tell us, yes, you're getting sound with your picture.
Absolutely. And I have to admit, I love the woman who's giving like a laundry list of reminders to her friend before climbing into the stagecoach, and the man who climbs into the coach after her, who sticks his head out the door and reminds the woman's friend about the cat because she kept going on about the cat.
Now, Nellie, don't forget to put the cat in the mothballs.
Yeah, she was, I feel she would be a Karen in today's, parlance. She's just going on and on about things that ultimately aren't really that important. So they head out the coach heads out into, the wilderness, the desert wilderness, and before long, we are introduced to the Cisco Kid, and I think he's upon a rewards, paper for, the bounty on his head, and kinda smiles and laughs and has a little chuckle to himself about that before going off and robbing this horse-drawn carriage, coach at gunpoint. And I think he makes off with, I think it's $5,000 worth of gold bars, I think it is that he makes off
Yes.
with, but he doesn't. I think it's important to note he doesn't steal from the passengers, I don't believe.
No, he doesn't.
He gets him out yeah, he gets him out of the coach and kinda threatens them, but ultimately he just takes the cold hard cash and lets everybody else go on their merry way. I mean, I'm sure they all had valuables that he could have taken, but he decided not to.
Yeah, I noticed he's like a charming gentleman bandit. Like when he wishes the passenger of the stagecoach he just robbed to, quote, have a very safe and pleasant journey. And he's flirting with the young Italian female passenger while being on the receiving end of the older ladies, unwanted flirtations, and that older lady who was the woman going on about the cat. Earlier, she kind of sounds like a Margaret Hamilton from The Wizard of Oz.
Yes, I hadn't placed that, but now that you say that, yeah, that's exactly who she reminded me of.
And also, when I first saw the Cisco Kid, I couldn't stop staring at his hat, and I got it kind of pains me to say it, but it kinda reminded me of the Sorting Hat from Harry Potter. It was like, it kind of bunched and just
Yeah, he's that's, definitely an all-time, top 10 hat in movies, I think. It's very his whole costume was very distinctive throughout the film. He's got
yeah.
the black I think of in an easy comparison would be I'm drawing a blank on the film now with Chevy Chase and Martin Short
Oh,
and Three Amigos. That's what
thank you. I
yeah.
heard these 3 caballeros, I'm like, "That's solid."
Yeah, so that black with the silver trim and
Like the
I
Matador type.
I feel like this costume was what those 3 were pantomiming in that movie. So
Absolutely.
I wouldn't be surprised if you talk to those guys or talk to the costume designer for that movie that they'd seen this and thought it was pretty cool.
He's definitely got style, I'll give him that. You won't see that
Yeah,
in a lot of
absolutely.
westerns.
Yep, and the little mustache that he's got going on, and he's very suave. He's
He
very
is.
charming. And we'll see that a little bit later when he's talking to the ladies on the homestead, the older ladies. But so for now, the stagecoach gets to the next town, its destination, and they kind of go into the barracks, whoever's the military post there, whoever's in charge of keeping order, and let the guys in charge know that they've been robbed by the Cisco Kid. And so then we get introduced to this Mickey Dunn, the sergeant, who's going to be the one who goes out to find the Cisco Kid and bring him in dead or alive, essentially.
Yeah, and Dunn is kinda like he kinda is introduced in a more stereotypical way. He is, yeah, a card sharp, or he thinks he is.
Yeah, yeah.
He'll do anything just, like, to make a buck, to kind of, maybe try to scam his fellow officers out of, like, their money, what they can, and almost maybe a little bit of a idiot in a sense.
Yeah.
He thinks he's, like, the big man, and maybe he's not quite as suave as he thinks he is, at least in this moment.
And I mean, ostensibly he's the law, so he's the good guy, but he's kind of a jerk quite a bit throughout the film.
Yeah, he really is.
He's not always a really nice guy. He's kind of a womanizer when you get boiled right down to it. He's got a girl. We find out pretty soon in the next couple scenes that he's got a girlfriend. He's got a picture of himself and another girl in his pocket. And then he goes off and starts flirting with the Cisco Kid's girlfriend, Tonya, that we'll meet in a few moments. So he's not the stereotypical, sheriff in the white hat kind of Western hero that we often associate with that genre.
No, not at all.
And flip side of the coin, the Cisco Kid is not the ruthless bandit. We already mentioned he's very charming, he's very suave, and he's not 100% ruthless, even though he is all dressed in black with the awesome silver trim.
Yes, which seems a little, at least at this point in the movie, a little different from the O. Henry story.
Yeah. What did you think of the story before we go any further with the film?
I really actually enjoyed the story.
Yeah, as did I.
And one of my favorite things was, like, the narrator has this amazing sense of humor, and almost like the screenwriter, I think it's Tom Barry, took that sense of humor from the narrator and gave it to the Cisco Kid for the movie.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. It's a short story. It was originally published in, I forget what the magazine was, but it's kind of those serial type magazines
Mhm.
of the time. But then it was also in a collection of short stories, and it's only probably about 5 to 10 pages, depending on what sort of book you're reading it in. It took me probably about 10-15 minutes to read it tops. So it's pretty short, and I think for the most part, the film sticks to the basic construct of the story pretty well. Obviously, it's fleshing out certain things, especially in the first half, but I think it sticks pretty well to it. What makes the story good is what makes, what I enjoy about the film as well.
It is, I agree, and but the one thing going back and looking again at the story after seeing the movie was, like, the descriptions are almost like I'll get to Tonya later, but, in the book, it's not Dunn, it's Lieutenant Sandridge is that character, so it's not Mickey, and the description of Lieutenant Sandridge is, quote, 6'2", blonde as a Viking, quiet as a deacon, dangerous as a machine gun, and that is quite the departure
Yeah.
from and then Lowe, who plays Nicky Dunn, the sergeant, who
Right.
is 2 inches shorter with dark hair, and and as for Dunn, he's neither quiet nor dangerous.
No, no, he's definitely not. Like you said, he's kind of a fool sometimes, and obviously we'll find out kind of steps in it once he starts getting involved in everything.
But one other thing I just wanna mention, the Cisco Kid doesn't really sing in the movie that I recall, but I like how his the narrator describes the kid's singing voice in the story, which also proves my point about his sense of humor because the description is, quote, "He had a voice like a coyote with bronchitis, and whenever he chose to sing a song, he sang it."
Yeah, I think there's one scene, I think it was when Tonya is about to head into town to go to the saloon. I think there's one very short, I don't know if he sings, but I know he does a little little guitar thing
Yes.
there for her. But yeah, I caught that as well. So in terms so Dunn is going to go out and find the Cisco Kid, but before he does that, he decides to go get a shave and haircut. So he goes into the barber shop, and there's a really funny scene there where the Cisco Kid is already in the barber shop. I guess he's supposed to be hilarious little Italian barber in there, very stereotypical Italian barber. And him and two of the other, I think it's two of the other, military men or just someone else from the town. They're in there talking about the Cisco Kid while the Cisco Kid is sitting there right in the chair. And of course, he leans right into it with that charm of his. He's like, "Oh, you're gonna kill this guy. Why would you do that? He can't be such a bad guy." Even, eventually he's talking to Dunn face to face. They're being pretty chummy for, one guy who wants to kill the other one, even though he doesn't know who he is. So I thought that whole sequence in the barbershop was pretty funny, and I thought that was very well played, given that we obviously know who everybody is at that point, but they don't all know.
Yeah, that was actually one of my favorite scenes. It's almost straight out of a comedy.
Yeah.
Like, you wouldn't think you're actually watching, like, this almost like a stereotypical Western at while the scene goes on, and it just kind of just illustrates what a nice light comedic touch that Warner Baxter as the Cisco Kid brings to his role. It's not just like, stone face and, he's the killer and blah, blah, blah. It's like, "Yeah, I'm the killer, whatever, let's just have a good time."
Yeah, exactly. I think that scene, obviously, the way they voted and the way they determined who the winners were for the Oscars was different at that time, but I think if we're putting it back into kind of how we do it today, that would have been the scene that really solidified it for him for winning the award.
Agreed. But I also know with Edmund Lowe as Dunn, that it took me every time would watch him, and if I wasn't paying too much attention, I was just listening and just watching him go, he kinda reminded me, like, had a vague resemblance to, like, a John Wayne, particularly at that time,
Yeah.
which I thought was really interesting considering that co-director Raoul Walsh also, like, 2 years later, went on to helm The Big Trail with, of course, John Wayne as its star.
Yeah, no, I definitely felt some John Wayne vibes coming from him as well. Not quite the same presence as John Wayne would ultimately have, but
No,
definitely
it's
that same kind of way of speaking and way of walking into the room and things like that.
exactly. Yeah.
So we see eventually Dunn does find out that the man he was just talking to is the Cisco Kid himself, and it's where the story started to fall apart just a little bit for me. Instead of jumping on a horse and chasing after him right away, he's like, "Oh shucks, I missed it." And I noted down so that he's I think it's the blacksmith, one of the town guys that he's talking
Mhm.
to, and there's a horse nearby, and he says the guy tells him that that's it was the Cisco Kid you were just talking to, and it sounds like he's about to say, like, "Oh, damn," and instead of that, there's a donkey sound, and I'm like, "Did they just censor his swearing with a donkey braying in the background?"
I think we did.
Well, I'll be. Shut up, you jackass.
And I went back and listened a second time, and I'm like, I think that's what they were trying to do there. That's kinda,
Yeah.
again, an ingenious, much better use of sound for a comedic effect than I've seen in some of these other early sound films.
Yes, agreed. It's so good. You can see almost where, like, later somewhat later movies, like in the 30s and the 40s, when they would do something similar like that comedic effect, you could
Yeah.
almost see where it might have learned it from this movie and other maybe, there's probably others around the same time.
Yeah, exactly. So then, so Cisco Kid is ridden off on his horse. We see where he is headed to, and this is where we finally, and we're probably about 40 minutes in at this point, we finally meet Tonya Maria, his girlfriend, but not before we see her send another man who we don't know, and we never really find out who he is, out of the homestead where she is, and because obviously she's having some other affairs beyond just hanging out with the Cisco Kid. And she's there with at least one older woman who I'm not sure if it was supposed to be her mother, her grandmother, or just some old woman that she lived with. It was never really made clear.
Yeah, I wondered that myself. I have it in my notes, like, "What?"
She, at first it seems like it's a grandma or a mother, but then, she kind of refers to her as the cook later on, or she's just the kind of the hired help. And it's never really made clear what the relationship is there.
No, it's not. But, again, going back to the story, the way they describe her, the film Tanya's outfit, kinda remind me of something that came from the Delia's Spring 1996 catalog from, like, the way
Yeah.
she was dressed was weirdly modern for that
Yeah.
time, but I like how she's in correlation, I like how she's a Spitfire, and you can see why the Cisco Kid is smitten with her and even, Dunn comes later on, and the older woman's the same, so it's almost you get this spiky relationship between her and the older woman, whether she's the cook or maternal figure or
Yeah.
whatever. The way they described the way O. Henry wrote her, quote, "Oh, yes, a woman who is half Carmen and half Madonna can always be something more. The rest, let us say, was hummingbird." And that's not how to describe the
Yeah.
film Sonya at all.
Yeah. Yeah, she's definitely they definitely took some liberties with her as well. But in a way, I think it works with what they're trying to do here in putting it on screen. So yeah, she's a stronger female character, I think, than we often see around this time, and even today for that matter.
Yes.
And I really enjoyed that. I was looking into her, so she was played by Dorothy Burgess. I didn't see anything indicating kind of what her heritage was, but she played the Mexican woman, from the Southwest very well for someone who I don't think was of that heritage. And obviously you can twist things a little bit with, not being in color. You can, skin tones and things, but I thought I don't think she was anything like that character in terms of her own actual heritage.
No, I was thinking the same thing.
The two of them, the Cisco Kid and Tonya Maria, have, some little flirtations and things. They end up making some ham and eggs for him, giving him something to eat. And then eventually we cut back to Dunn, who's in the saloon in town, I guess trying to get some intel about where he can find the Cisco Kid. Again, we see him talking to some other woman who's at the bar, who's sobbing into her drink, trying to comfort her. I say comfort in air quotes. And then eventually Tanya heads out, leaves the Cisco Kid and goes into town and meets up with Dunn at the saloon herself. And that's another thing, she leaves, and the kind of the bartender, one of the guys there, says, you have no idea who that lady is. And they kind of leave the scene at that, but obviously we all know who that is and what's going on there.
Exactly. I will say that I thought there was like a nice juxtaposition with Dunn in the bar talking to the girl from Boston as she laments that, all men are bums. And then you cut to the Cisco kid serenading Tonya in
Yeah.
our place. And it's just like subtly suggesting that he's just as bad in his own way,
Yeah.
even though on the surface it seems otherwise. And then you get Tonya's interaction with Dunn at the bar. And that is a lot of fun. And he gives as good as he gets, and then, of course, like you said, that's when he finds out, "Oh, hey, wait a minute, let's stay close to this girl."
Right, yeah. So she obviously catches his eye, and that one, it's something that he's a little bit more interested in than just kind of a one night stand, it sounds like. So she heads back to the homestead. The Cisco kid leaves, and I can't imagine the scripting of this. Obviously, it's some of it's in the story a little bit,
Mhm.
with the scripting of, okay, Cisco kid has to leave just as Dunn or I, that kind of thing, and then
Uh-oh.
reverse once we get a little bit later. And maybe back then it wasn't very very well spelled out. They just kind of played it by ear, but I imagine nowadays all that would be spelled out in detailed notes in a script.
Oh, yes.
But so Tony and Maria is bragging about Dunn to the older woman when she gets back, not realizing that he's standing right behind her. So she invites him in for a drink. He tells her all about going back to New York soon and how great New York is. Then we cut to interesting scene of the kid kind of off on his own. So he's left the homestead there. He's gone off and he's actually doing some honest labor, it seems like, rustling some cattle and making some money that way. And there's these three other cattle hands, cattle ranchers who are just kind of sitting there watching, and they decide to claim the bounty on the kid's head and go follow him into the hills and shoot him, which of course is the worst idea that they could ever have. And they end up, two of them end up shot and killed, and the third one manages to escape, but the kid yells after him, tell him that you met the kid today, and the other two didn't survive, kind of thing. So don't make sure that they know it was me that did this, in a sense.
Yes.
So then we get towards the evening time. Dunn and Tonya have had a little moment at the homestead, and they go off together and meet up with his army buddies in their camp. And again, still going on and on about New York, how great it is. Teaching her how to say things with a New York accent, and which she utterly fails at. And then she kind of sneaks away and finds the reward pamphlet in Dunn's belongings and confronts him about that. And of course, he's pretty quick to come up with the idea, oh, I was going to give you the money. I was going to, let you have all the, I wasn't going to keep that for myself, which she buys hook, line, and sinker, of course, because $5,000 back then was a lot of money.
Indeed. And, she's just a modern girl in all senses. She wants to make sure any man who's interested in her earns a good wage and he's going to treat her like the queen she believes she is. Which is why she's just like only flash of anger until she's like, oh, okay, you want to give me the money? Ah, okay, we're all good then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I guess we can do that. Yeah. So then, I guess later that evening, Tonya and Dunn are at the homestead, and that's when the kid comes back from, doing his cattle rustling, and he's kind of hiding in the trees, and he hears that there's things going on between them. So now he knows that the guy that is out to chase him is hooking up with his girl, and she's betrayed him at this point. So Dunn leaves. She says, it's sure that the kid is going to come back tonight. I'll send you a message, let you know when he's here, and then you can come back and get him. So they're scheming together to try and take the kid out. So then the kid comes in, and they start drinking, getting a little tipsy. And this is the classic thing, and we see it even nowadays, where he's pretending to drink and she's the one who's probably actually getting drunk. I think is
Yep.
kind of what was going on there. So he's getting her a little tipsy, and his plan. Well, she decides to write the note. He steps out for a minute, and she decides to write the note because obviously he's there. So now's the opportunity. She writes the note, sends it off with the old woman, but the old woman gets stopped by the kid before she can leave, and he rewrites the note, keeping the same idea, the same theme, but adding in the fact that when the kid leaves, he's going to be dressed up in women's clothing. So when Dunn comes to shoot him, he should shoot the one who's dressed as a woman. And anyone who's ever seen a Hollywood movie can tell where this is going. So, but to spell it out for those who don't know what I'm actually talking about, so the message gets delivered to Dunn. He reads it, realizes that's his chance, goes to kill the kid, and of course, the kid convinces Tonya Maria, who's dressed in the exact outfit that he said when he rewrote the note, to go out in front of the homestead. And ultimately, the kid hops on his horse. Dunn thinks that that's Tonya who's running away dressed as the kid. He shoots the one who's dressed as the woman, who is actually Tonya, and the kid manages to escape. And I wrote down the last line. He's standing nearby. He hears the woman, the Tonya scream, sitting on his horse, smoking a cigarette, and he says, "Her flirting days are over, and she's ready to settle down now." And then he rides off. That's a great final line,
It is.
as terrible as the sentiment is, because she's dead. But I thought the line itself was really good.
It's such a good line. It's so cruel yet so poetic.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously that whole last act hews very closely to the O. Henry story. And that's, in my opinion, the strongest part of the film is that last, it's not even 30 minutes. It's probably about 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's all I
Once
was
they finally
thinking.
get that thing in motion. There's a lot of setup that gets us to that point, but that last 20 minutes is pretty strong, I thought.
I agree. And I felt the same way reading the story too.
Yeah,
Once
exactly.
you realize how what was going to happen, you're like, oh,
Yeah.
yep, he's just as ruthless in love as he is in life. So
Exactly. Yeah. So I thought they did, I kind of glossed over it a little bit, but while Tanya is away at the saloon talking to Dunn, there's a scene with the kid back at the homestead, kind of flirting a little bit with the old woman, being playful. And then there's some other woman there who's got a baby, and he takes the baby and he's being all cute with the baby. And I was like, oh, see, he's not such a bad guy.
I
He's, he loves the babies. He loves the women, even the older women. And nope, he gets his girlfriend killed at the end. So,
yeah, it's all good. Just don't cross him.
right, exactly, exactly. So, anything I missed going through,
Think it's mostly what I have as well.
and also wanted to mention to the very end, after he says that last line and rides off into the night. So there's I guess today we would call it a theme song called "By Tonya" that plays over that ending, and I actually really liked that song.
Mhm.
I I want to go back and listen to the lyrics a little bit more to see how it ties into that ending, if it does at all. But just hearing it at the end, the first time I watched through the film, I did like that closing.
It's really good, and you can see where like the later westerns borrowed from it. That concept, that is,
Yeah.
of having like a song at the end that ties back into the story, and then you hear it at the beginning, you hear it at the end.
Yeah, and we see that even today, with the a lot of the songs that are nominated for best original song are those, the only place they appear in the film is during the end credits. Sometimes they're in the movie itself, but a lot of times it's just that end credit song.
Especially during like the 80s, 90s,
Yeah.
early aughts,
Yeah.
you totally get a bet.
That was prime credit song nomination time.
Absolutely.
My Heart Will Go On. That's the one that immediately comes to mind.
Even though I hate the movie, I have the Aerosmith song, Don't Wanna Miss a Thing.
Oh, yeah.
I hate
Yep.
Armageddon, but that song immediately popped in my head.
Yep, that's another good one. Same time period too.
Exactly. Or like, with Arthur. I'm gonna forget the name of the damn song, but, it's Arthur's theme. It's Christopher Cross who sings it, and when you hear it, it was a big hit at the time, and as soon as you hear it, you're like, "Okay." He even
Yeah.
puts, like, a lyric in the second verse of, like he mentions Arthur, so you're like, "Okay."
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So move on to some of the folks involved. You already touched a little bit on Raoul Walsh. I talked a little bit about him when I covered Sadie Thompson, which is one of the previous films he directed that was nominated at the first Oscars. I think I mentioned it in that episode, but one of the early roles he had as an actor was playing John Wilkes Booth in The Birth of a Nation, the D.W. Griffith film.
Interesting.
Obviously, he started filming this film in old Arizona. And do you know the story of the accident that caused him to not be able to finish it?
I got minutes.
Go for it. You tell it.
Okay, well, apparently Walsh was cast as the Cisco Kid, as well as being the director. But during a return drive to Los Angeles from Utah, a jackrabbit jumped through the windshield of Walsh's car, with both the rabbit and the broken glass hitting Walsh in the face. Ironically, safety glass was added to cars the following year. The damage to Walsh's right eye necessitated replacing him in the lead role, rewriting the script, and reshooting some scenes with a different actor, while Walsh recuperated. Walsh thereafter wore the eye patch for which he was known and eventually lost the eye entirely. And there's rumors that some footage of Walsh in chase scenes and long shots remains in the film.
I had not seen that part, but I'd be curious to see which one's there. Maybe somebody can do a deep, detailed analysis of the shots at some point and figure out if they're him.
I do have an addendum to that, though.
Go for it.
I thought this was really interesting. So we know Walsh was injured. He was supposed to start as the Cisco Kid, lost his eye in the accident. His replacement was Buddy Roosevelt. Poor Buddy broke his leg shortly before the picture was to start again. And he was replaced by Warner Baxter, who, yes, managed to stay in one place and score an Oscar. So
Right. Yep.
kudos to Mr. Baxter.
Yep. Being in the right place at the right time when you step in for somebody else.
Yes.
Not quite as dramatic, but it's a little bit of the Eric Stoltz, Michael J. Fox, and Back to the Future.
Marty McFly, yep.
What a different world it could have been if some of those things hadn't changed.
I know.
So I actually wasn't able to find too much on Irving Cummings, who stepped in to take over from Walsh. He was the one who's actually nominated for Best Director for this film, since he was the one who finished it up and probably did the majority of it, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And saw it through to the finish. He started in movies in the late 1910s. Obviously, this was probably his biggest claim to fame. Yeah, anything you have on Cummings?
No, I was looking for something too, and he just he just kind of, I guess, went about his business, and that was
Yeah.
it.
Just kept it cool.
No jackrabbits to screw up.
Yeah, exactly. Stayed away from the jackrabbits.
Yes.
As far as the writers, Tom Barry, who was the screenwriter, he, again, not too much on him. Vaudeville sketch writer was all I was pretty much able to find. He was double nominee this year for both this film and The Valiant, which I'll be covering in a couple weeks on the podcast.
Cool.
Obviously, we've talked at length about the O. Henry story. He's, I guess, fairly prolific. I knew the name, but I don't think I've ever really read any of his work until I read this.
Same.
So short stories, poetry, some nonfiction, a couple of novels, I believe. So obviously, I think would have been a fairly well-known name at that time, that people would, especially, short stories. Like I said earlier, those were always in kind of the Harper's Magazine, the Bazaar, those sorts of things.
Exactly.
So people would have seen those names
Yep.
in publications like that.
That's how Dickens did it in the beginning too.
That's
so.
right. Yep. Dickens,
Louisa May Alcott, I think.
Hemingway's the other one who did a lot of writing like that. So Baxter as the Cisco Kid, not too much on him other than this. I saw that he was in The Great Gatsby in 1926, 42nd Street, and a couple years later in 1933. Looks like he did make a decent transition from silent to sound films, as a lot of people at this time did not. So it's good to see that he did transition, it seemed like.
Yeah. Apparently, he was the first American to win the Academy Award for Best Actor.
Yes, because the previous year it was an Austrian who won, Emil Jannings. So yes, he was the first American to do so. And, he was never recognized in any sort of way after this. It looks like there's a series of films that he did all as one character, Dr. Robert Ordway, kind of a crime detective of some
Yes.
sort. So that was probably his, and he did also play the Cisco Kid at least one other time, from what I saw in his filmography. So the Cisco, and I know that the Cisco, so there's the O. Henry story, but I think the Cisco Kid was also a comic series as well around this time. So it was a character that had many iterations beyond just the story in the film.
Yeah, because I'd heard of Cisco Kid, just from westerns and whatnot, and I hadn't realized that O. Henry had actually written the story that potentially had introduced him. So I was like, that was a really interesting twist.
You talked a little bit about Edmund Lowe. Anything you have on him?
Yeah, there wasn't really much. Baxter's seems to be like the main breakout, other than of course Walsh, who went on to have a prolific directing career. Yeah, it was really hard. Yeah, he didn't have that much going for him. Apparently, he just kind of went about it and I guess got out of the business or something because he didn't have as interesting a life, I suppose. One way to phrase it.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a lot of credits from what I see, but I mean, it's nothing. None of these titles of the films are jumping out at me as something that would be noteworthy or that I would have seen before. So, again, one of those actors. He part of the studio system. He just kind of chugged along, cranking out a couple, 3 or 4 movies a year, and that's what he did.
Apparently, I'm looking at his page right now, to be fair, on IMDb, and I had seen him twice previously, I can tell. Dinner at Eight and I Love You Again, which was a William Powell Myrna
Okay.
rom-com. I thought the name rung a bell more than anything, but he didn't really necessarily stand out as much as his bigger name co-stars.
Yeah, and then, of course, there is, Miss Dorothy Burgess playing Tonya Maria, and the one interesting thing I found out about her was that she was charged with manslaughter in 1932 after someone died in an automobile accident she was involved in. So, probably the most scandal out of these 3 was from her. And she, from what I read, she was placed in the sanitarium after this, and eventually sued the victim's parents, and some damages were agreed upon eventually at that point. So interesting to see that, obviously people in the public eye, celebrities, are involved in stuff like this even today. So it's something that's as old as the industry itself, unfortunately.
Yep.
This was actually her first film that she was in. And again, I didn't really see any very famous films other than this one. I see a lot of westerns. Yeah, so she continued working until 1943. So, and that was, well, she lived several years after that. But yeah, I think that I'm a little bit surprised that that whole legal issue didn't put a bigger damper on her career, and that she was able to work for at least another 10 years or so with that hanging over her head.
Well, everybody gets a second chance in Hollywood.
That's right. Or a third or fourth or
I was
fifth.
thinking that.
Depending on how much money you can make the studio. That's how many chances you get.
Exactly.
So obviously we mentioned at the top a little bit that this is the one of the first fully talking pictures. That was the first Western filmed as a talkie. The first talkie to be filmed outdoors on some of
Mhm.
these beautiful locations, including Bryce Canyon National Park and Zion National Park in Utah, San Juan Capistrano Mission, and the Mojave Desert in California. So they were out there in these beautiful places. The only thing I wish is that we could have seen them in color and they weren't just in black and white.
Yeah, but even in black and white, you could just tell the difference from shooting on a soundstage as
Yeah.
opposed to actually being in the element.
Yep, just the way the lighting hits, and the even at night, some of the evening scenes, you can the long shadows, things like that. It's something to look at for sure.
Almost makes you wonder what John Ford could have done with it.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Any other trivia? Anything else about the production or anything that went into it that you have?
I think you basically have what I had. So
Perfect. Well, how about any reviews, either contemporary reviews or things that you found more recently online?
I didn't find much.
Yeah, the only one I found was from Variety, and it was from right around the end of the year, so a couple days after Christmas in 1928, right before the new year. And Variety said it was said that Fox would never turn loose a full-length talker until the studio was convinced the picture was right. In Old Arizona, that it's right is unquestioned at this time. It's the first outdoor talker and a Western with a climax twist to make the story stand out from the usual Hill and Dale thesis.
Yep.
I think that pretty well captures it. It's definitely, in terms of the other films that I've been watching for this second Oscars, at least, this one definitely stands out head and shoulders above the rest so far.
It looks like the New York Times said it was basically gave it faint praise. Like it almost sounds like it's damning with faint praise, but a distinctly enjoyable offering.
Yeah. And then I found this one. It was obviously more recent on Dennis Schwartz from Dennis Schwartz Movie Reviews, a website that I found. He was not as crazy about the film, but mainly based on some of the character traits that we've already talked about. He said the 3 main characters are all unpleasant, egotistical types who are motivated by selfish reasons, but pretend they care about others. This, along with how tedious it is, makes it only seem like a necessary film for cinephiles, techie freaks, and whoever else is interested in such a museum piece. So I thought that was a little harsh on the film as a whole. I agree the characters aren't all great people. I mean, none of the 3 of them are really upstanding citizens, but to bring down the movie as a whole because of I think they play those bad characters well
Yeah,
in terms of what the world of the movie is.
right. And not just None of them are heroes by any stretch, but they're more like they're mostly just protagonists or even flawed the flawed everyman that was really popular with during like the height of the TV, like the golden age of TV that we had like 10 years ago, like with Mad Men and Breaking
Breaking
Bad
Bad,
and
yeah. Yep,
Sopranos, and
exactly.
it's more like that ilk than you can almost like that also makes it more interesting too. It's not just black hat, white hat, damsel in distress.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciated this more than some of the high society New York, Broadway type movies that I've been watching for this. It was a nice diversion from those types of movies that seemed a little bit more conservative in terms of what they were trying to do and the approaches that they were taking to telling the stories.
I know the movies you're talking about, but in general, and that continues into the 30s as well. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, obviously, we mentioned that Baxter won the award for Best Actor in the Second Academy Awards for portraying the Cisco Kid. He defeated George Bancroft for Thunderbolt, Chester Morris in Alibi, Paul Muni in The Valiant, and Louis Stone in The Patriot. And we'll be covering all of those except The Patriot a little bit later this season because that film is lost, unfortunately. So, anything else you want to mention before we get to some ratings and final thoughts?
I did see that the Ethel Barrymore is still in operation and currently is housing a fellow with Denzel Washington and Jake Gyllenhaal.
Don't want to see that. I wish I could get down there to see that. That would be fantastic.
That would be cool.
But good to know that theater, is it still go by that name?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, congratulations to Ethel Barrymore for sticking around for almost 100 years.
You don't mess with Ethel.
That's right. All right. Well, we'll give out some final ratings here. I gave this initially a 7 out of 10. There's some really good things. There's a couple things I initially rolled it back for, but I'm almost starting to inch that it might be an 8 out of 10 after we've talked about it for the last hour. So I'm like at a 7.9. Like I'm close. I'm almost ready to make it an 8.
I did make it an 8 on IMDb. I was a little kinder to it on Letterboxd. I think I did give it the 4 because I was rounding up, so it's probably like a 3.75, and I'm like, I'll give it the 4. 3.5 didn't seem quite enough.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think it's definitely, it does the sound very well. There's a couple scenes where it's a little bit hard to understand what they're saying, but for the first time, I'm willing to give that a little bit of a pass. It does a lot of the sound stuff for the sake of the story rather than for the sake of throwing in a musical number, which I really appreciated after some of the other films that we'll be talking about in a couple of weeks. So stay tuned for those. But yeah, I thought overall, story-wise, it was really strong. Obviously, it's got a good basis in the short story that they're working from, so that kind of gives it a head start. Talked about the costumes were good, the cinematography, those desert landscapes were fantastic. So yeah, I think I'll bump it up to an 8. I'm willing to make the leap with you. Well, I will include a list of resources, any of the reviews, and anything else that we mentioned in the episode, as well as a link to where you can watch In Old Arizona right online at your leisure. Joanne, thanks so much for coming on the show to talk about In Old Arizona and remind people once again where they can find your work.
You can find Pop Goes My Brain on Substack, and I like to say I update it twice a month.
Excellent. And don't forget to follow The Oscar Project at theoscarproject.substack.com. And be sure to come back for next Friday's episode of the Oscar Project podcast, where I will be discussing the film The Broadway Melody. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you at the movies.